Well, Washington was abuzz this week after former FBI Director James Comey accused the White House of lying about his dismissal and accused Donald Trump of pressuring him to carry out the president's wishes. But while Comey confirmed that Trump himself was not a target of the FBI's Russia investigation, he declined to say whether the president's actions amounted to possible obstruction of justice. VOA's Michael Bowman has our report.
While a nation held its breath and onlookers swarmed to Capitol Hill, James Comey broke his silence 1 month after President Trump fired him as FBI director, and White House officials accused him of leaving the FBI in disarray.
Those were lies, plain and simple. And I am so sorry that the FBI workforce had to hear them, and I'm so sorry that the American people were told them.
Comey detailed a series of one-on-one meetings and telephone calls he says Trump orchestrated.
I was so stunned by the conversation because it was very, very awkward. He was asking for something and I was refusing to give it.
Specifically, Comey said, the president wanted an end to the FBI's probe of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who lied about contacts with Russia's ambassador.
I took it as a direction. Right. I mean, this is the President of the United States, with me alone, saying, I hope this.
And Comey said Trump pressed him to publicly affirm that he personally was not under investigation. The exchanges led Comey to undertake something he had not done with previous presidents, write memos about his dealings with Trump.
And joining us now for the fallout, if any, from James Comey's testimony, we are joined from our rooftop by VOA National correspondent Jim Malone, who probably has the best view of the Capitol today here in Washington. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Mil.
And right here in Studio 52, our very own VOA White House Bureau Chief Steve Herman, who's had another busy week covering the president. I thank you both for joining us. Jim Malone, very interesting to note that yesterday the streets were very quiet here in D.C. Bars were open early. Did Comey's testimony actually live up to the hype?
In some ways, yes. Maybe in other ways, no. You know, my big takeaway here, I think in a long-term political impact, you had a high-ranking former FBI official tell Congress that he decided to take careful notes and for memos about his conversations with the President of the United States because he feared the President would be lying about some of their interactions. These are extraordinary revelations coming out of this hearing. And on that score, I think it goes to this issue of credibility, the president's credibility, and also what you noticed yesterday is during the Comey testimony, the Republicans, although they were trying to defend the president, they weren't doing much challenging of what Comey had to say in his testimony.
Steve Herman, to Jim Malone's point, does this hurt the president's credibility? What was your takeaway from this hearing?
I think this was damaging. There's no doubt about it. The key question is it short-term damage, or does it lead to something that is eventually going to be fatal for this administration? And it's really too early to know that right now.
The headline that I thought was stunning for me was the fact that the former head of the FBI actually called the White House, therefore the president, a liar. Lying is not something used very loosely here in Washington. What do you make of that charge?
Well, as Jim said, extraordinary testimony, very blunt, very direct, definitely targeted at the president. Over at the White House, though, the talking points is that Comey is a liar and Comey is a leaker. And the president tweeting on Friday morning that as a result of this testimony, he's been vindicated. So a very different perception of this within the West Wing.
Jim Malone, I'm wondering if you can speak to the president's allegations that this is pure vindication for him, that he actually won. Can the president actually call this vindication when he's been called a liar and he's possibly the subject now of an investigation into obstruction of justice?
It may be a stretch, and I think if you asked Republicans in Congress, they might not be willing to completely back that up quite yet. One of the central issues here is his reported conversation with Trump over Michael Flynn and his assertion that he felt it was a directive from the president to end the Flynn investigation. The president's lawyer says that did not happen. The question is, was that enough right there to present the idea of obstruction of justice, which is a criminal term? Right now it's debatable, but it may be the start of something there and may add to the investigation, and that would be a problem for the president.
Steve, for someone who prides himself in being a really good counterpuncher, the president showed some remarkable discipline yesterday, not even making one single tweet during the entire hearing. But the White House has responded. What is the White House saying now?
Well, Sarah Huckabee Sanders came out to brief reporters while Comey was still testifying midday Thursday, and was saying it was just a regular Thursday at the White House. And there were questions asked about whether there's a taping system, because that was referred to in Comey's testimony as well. Comey said, if there are tapes, I hope they're released, because he feels that will verify what he was saying in his conversations at the dinner with the president. And Sanders was pressed about that, the chief deputy spokesperson, and she said, jokingly, well, maybe she'll look under the sofas to see if there are any recording devices. So they haven't answered the question about whether there is some sort of taping system in the White House. Right. And that, again, is another thing that harkens back to the Nixon era and Watergate.
And Jim Malone, I suspect that question is going to be raised probably as early as next week by some lawmakers. The fact that was there or was there not a recording? In fact, Jim Comey said, Lordy, I hope there is a recording. What do you think is going to take place here?
Yeah, right now it's Comey's word against the president's. But, here's the other thing, I think, in a bottom line sense, Mill. Even if there is some intimation of law breaking, what does that mean? Under our system, it's not clear if the president can be charged with a crime. Under the Constitution, generally what happens here is if the president is suspected of what's called high crimes and misdemeanors, it's referred to the building over my shoulder, the Congress, for impeachment proceedings. Well, who controls Congress right now? Both houses are controlled by Republicans. And based on yesterday, I'm not seeing any clear breaks with Republicans on the president where it could lead that way. Democrats themselves cannot present impeachment articles. So for the moment, I think Republicans may think there's been no bombshell here, but I think clearly they're uneasy about where this is all going because the Mueller probe will continue indefinitely.
Steve, speak to me about the unease among Republican lawmakers. I mean, the kind of support we've seen is rather tepid at best. I think Paul Ryan did try to defend the president.
Well, on the Senate side, you have several senators who are openly skeptical of what the president has done and what he's doing, and there are a number of other senators on the GOP side that certainly feel that way as well. But the key is really the Republicans in the House of Representatives. And no one dares speak out unless they want to lose their seat, because the president's threatened to support opponents against them in primary Republican elections. Right. And so, as Jim pointed out, with that sort of control of both houses of Congress, unless there's some sort of mass defection by House Republicans that feel that it's better to run away from the president than stick by his side, we're not going to really see any movement towards an impeachment in the Congress.
Jim Malone, what would it take for Republican lawmakers to start peeling off their support for the president? Because as Steve and you have mentioned, support from the Republican base remains fairly solid at this stage.
Well, it's interesting to note the polls show the president's approval rating is dropping to pretty low levels, but his core base of supporters appear to be hanging with him. That's really what Republican lawmakers are watching, and it's actually a risk for them to abandon the president and then risk the ire of those Trump voters who they rely on to get elected. So the dynamics here would have to change considerably. But as I say, it's a clear, beautiful day here in Washington. You can't see the cloud of the Russia investigation behind me. but I can assure you it's there and it's going to remain there for some time to come.
And last word, I hear that cloud is getting darker and darker.
Well, it all depends on what media you're watching, because if you watch the conservative media, Fox News, then you think everything is hunky-dory with the presidency. And if you watch some of the other channels, MSNBC, CNN, you think that we're perhaps weeks away from the end of this presidency. And the reality is obviously somewhere in the middle.
Well, I suspect we will be following this story fairly closely. Steve Herman and Jim Malone, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break right now, but when we come back, the latest on the snap election this week in the United Kingdom, some calling the results a shocker. This is The Correspondent on Voice of America.